If you've grown peppers that stayed small, stayed green forever, or barely produced anything despite a perfectly healthy-looking plant, this video fixes that. We're covering the entire pepper journey, start to finish. And there's one specific thing about starting pepper seeds that trips up almost everyone, because peppers genuinely need something tomatoes don't. By the end of this video, you'll know exactly what your pepper plant needs at every stage, and exactly why peppers behave so differently from every other vegetable in your garden. Here's what's coming. First, choosing the right pepper for what you actually want, including how heat is actually measured. Then starting your seeds indoors. And the one thing that makes or breaks pepper germination specifically: transplanting outside, staking in support, feeding through each stage, and then the most common pepper problems and exactly how to fix each one, including the question almost every pepper grower eventually asks: why won't my peppers turn red? And finally, exactly when to harvest, whether you want them green or fully ripe, and how to store what you grow. Let's get started. Before you plant anything, it's worth understanding the range of what you're actually choosing between, because pepper covers an enormous amount of ground. Sweet peppers, bell peppers, banana peppers, pimentos have no real heat and are grown mainly for flavor, crunch, and color. Hot peppers range from mild, like jalapeños and poblanos, up through genuinely intense varieties like habaneros and ghost peppers. The heat comes from a compound called capsaicin, concentrated mainly in the white membrane inside the pepper, not the seeds themselves, despite what most people assume. The seeds simply sit close to that membrane and pick up some heat by contact, which is where the myth comes from. If you've ever seen pepper heat described in Scoville units, here's what that actually means. It's a measure of how much capsaicin is present, expressed as how many times a pepper extract needs to be diluted in sugar water before a panel of tasters can no longer detect any heat. A bell pepper measures at 0. A jalapeno sits somewhere around 2,500 to 8,000. A habanero jumps up to around 100,000 to 350,000. And the hottest varieties bred specifically for heat, like the Carolina Reaper, can reach over 2 million. For a first-time grower, this matters less for bragging rights and more for a practical reason. Hotter varieties generally take longer to reach maturity than sweet peppers, so if you're working with a shorter growing season, that's worth factoring into which type you choose. Almost every pepper starts out green and changes color as it ripens, to red, yellow, orange, purple, or even a deep chocolate brown, depending on the variety. Here's something worth knowing before you even plant. A few varieties are specifically bred to stay green even when fully ripe. If you've ever wondered why your neighbor's red pepper plant never turned red, checking the seed packet or plant tag for the variety name is the first thing to do. Some varieties simply don't change color at all, and that's not a problem with your growing. That's just the variety. Quick interesting detail before we get into the planting steps. Did you know capsaicin, the compound responsible for all that heat, isn't actually about flavor at all from the plant perspective? It's a defense chemical, evolved specifically to deter mammals from eating the fruit before the seeds are ready. Mammals have a strong pain response to capsaicin, but birds genuinely don't feel it the same way. And birds happen to be excellent at spreading pepper seeds far and wide when they eat the fruit whole and pass the seeds elsewhere undigested. So in a real sense, every hot pepper plant has spent millions of years getting better and better at convincing birds to eat it while actively discouraging everything else, including us. The fact that humans have turned that exact defense mechanism into one of the most popular flavors in the world is, when you think about it, a little bit of an accident the plant never intended. Okay, back to the garden. Let's get into actually growing this thing. Bell peppers, in particular, take real patience. Once a bell pepper reaches full size, it can take another 2 to 3 weeks of additional time on the plant before it actually changes color. Most of the green bell peppers you buy at the grocery store are simply unripe red peppers picked early, because growers can sell them faster that way. If you're growing your own, you get to decide: harvest green for a crunchier, more bitter flavor, or wait the extra weeks for a sweeter, fully ripe pepper with more nutrition. Here's the detail that trips up almost every new pepper grower, especially anyone who's grown tomatoes before and assumes the process is identical. It isn't. Pepper seeds need warmer soil to germinate than tomato seeds do, consistently. Tomatoes will germinate reasonably well in the high 60s to low 70s Fahrenheit. Peppers genuinely struggle below 75 degrees, and they germinate fastest and most reliably between 80 and 85 degrees. Without that heat, pepper seeds don't just sprout slowly. They can sit in the soil for 3, 4, even 5 weeks without germinating at all, and a lot of new gardeners give up and assume the seeds were bad, when really the soil was simply too cool. This is the single biggest reason to use a seedling heat mat for peppers specifically, even if you've never bothered with one for other crops. It's genuinely close to a requirement for consistent pepper germination indoors, not just a nice-to-have. Start your seeds indoors about 8 to 10 weeks before your last expected frost date, a couple of weeks earlier than you'd start tomatoes, since peppers are slower to get going from the very beginning. Use a seed-starting mix. Plant seeds about a 1/4 inch deep, and keep the soil consistently moist. Once seeds germinate, light matters just as much as it does for any seedling. A grow light positioned a few inches above the plants, run for 14 to 16 hours a day, prevents the same leggy, weak stretching you'd see in any seedling deprived of strong light. Pepper seedlings are also noticeably slower growing than tomato seedlings in general. Don't panic if your pepper seedlings look smaller and less developed than tomatoes started at the same time. That's completely normal for this plant, not a sign something's wrong. Hot pepper varieties in particular are often the slowest of all to germinate and establish, so factor in extra patience if you're growing something like a habanero or a ghost pepper for the first time. Just like tomatoes, pepper seedlings need to be hardened off before going into the ground, gradually introduced to outdoor sun, wind, and temperature over 7 to 10 days, starting with just an hour or two in a sheltered spot and building up from there. But peppers are even more sensitive to cold than tomatoes. Don't transplant outside until nighttime temperatures are reliably staying above 55 degrees Fahrenheit, and ideally above 60. A pepper plant exposed to a cold night early on can suffer lasting stunted growth that it never fully recovers from for the rest of the season, even if it survives. This is genuinely one of the most common mistakes. People transplant peppers on the same calendar schedule as tomatoes, and the peppers limp along all season as a result, simply because they got chilled once, early on. Unlike tomatoes, you don't bury pepper stems deep. Plant them at roughly the same depth they were growing in their container. Give each plant about 18 to 24 inches of space, a bit closer together than tomatoes need, since pepper plants generally stay more compact. Choose a site with at least 6 to 8 hours of direct sun. After transplanting, water deeply right away, and then be mindful going forward. Peppers actually prefer slightly less water than tomatoes do once established, and soil that's allowed to dry out a bit between waterings, rather than staying constantly moist, tends to produce better flavor and heat in hot pepper varieties specifically. Pepper plants are generally smaller and less sprawling than tomatoes, but many varieties still benefit from support, especially once they are loaded with fruit, since a heavy pepper crop on a relatively thin stem can cause branches to snap or the whole plant to topple in wind. A simple stake or small tomato cage works well for most pepper varieties. Larger, bushier varieties especially benefit from a cage that supports multiple branches at once, since peppers tend to branch out wide rather than growing tall and narrow the way indeterminate tomatoes do. Unlike tomatoes, pepper plants generally don't need aggressive pruning or sucker removal. Some growers pinch off the very first flower that appears, called the king flower, before the plant has had a chance to establish a strong root system. This redirects early energy into root and branch development rather than producing one early pepper, which can result in a stronger plant and a larger total harvest later in the season. This step is optional, but worth knowing about if you want to maximize total yield rather than getting the earliest possible first pepper. One more thing worth knowing before we move on. Peppers are genuinely one of the best vegetables for container growing, often better suited to pots than tomatoes are. Their root systems stay relatively compact compared to a sprawling indeterminate tomato, which means a container in the 12 to 14 inch range, in diameter and depth, is plenty for most pepper varieties, including hot peppers that can otherwise get fairly bushy. If you're growing in containers, a few things change slightly from in-ground growing. Containers dry out faster than garden soil, especially in hot weather, so you'll likely need to water more frequently, sometimes daily during peak summer heat. even though peppers generally prefer slightly drier soil overall. Check the soil with your finger an inch or two down rather than watering on a fixed schedule. Use a container with drainage holes. This is non-negotiable for peppers, since waterlogged roots in a pot are one of the fastest ways to lose a plant. A well-draining potting mix, rather than garden soil, which compacts badly in containers, makes a meaningful difference here too. Container-grown peppers also benefit from slightly more frequent feeding than in-ground plants, since nutrients wash out of a pot faster with each watering. Feeding every 2 weeks rather than every 3 is a reasonable adjustment if you're growing this way. The upside of containers is real flexibility. You can move a pepper plant to chase more sunlight through the day, or bring it indoors temporarily if an unexpected cold night threatens early in the season, something you obviously can't do with a plant in the ground. Coming up, we're getting into feeding peppers properly through each stage, and then the section most people are actually here for, the most common pepper problems, including the single most asked question in pepper growing, which is exactly why your peppers might be staying green. Like tomatoes, peppers need different nutrition at different stages, but there's an important difference worth understanding clearly. Early on, a balanced feed with adequate phosphorus supports root and early plant development. But peppers are even more sensitive to excess nitrogen than tomatoes are. Overfeed nitrogen, and you'll get a big, lush, dark green plant that produces a disappointing number of flowers and fruit. The plant essentially decides it's thriving and doesn't need to reproduce. If you've ever seen a gorgeous, healthy-looking pepper plant that just won't fruit, excess nitrogen is one of the first things to suspect. Once flowering begins, shift toward a fertilizer with more potassium and phosphorus relative to nitrogen, which supports flowering and fruit development rather than leafy growth. Feed every 2 to 3 weeks once established. Calcium matters here too. Similarly to tomatoes, a calcium-related issue can cause blossom end rot in peppers as well, showing up as a sunken, discolored patch near the blossom end of the fruit, and the cause and fix are the same as in tomatoes. It's almost always about watering consistency, not a true lack of calcium in the soil. Soil pH deserves a specific mention for peppers. They do best in a pH range of about 6.0 to 6.8. Outside that range, certain nutrients become chemically locked up in the soil and unavailable to the plant no matter how much fertilizer you apply. So if you're feeding consistently and still seeing nutrient deficiency symptoms, a simple soil pH test is worth doing before assuming you need to feed even more. Let's go through the most common pepper problems thoroughly, because pepper problems often look similar to tomato problems at first glance but have some genuinely different causes underneath. Leaf curling, and the several different reasons behind it. Pepper leaves curl for more reasons than almost any other symptom, so the details matter here. Leaves curling downward, especially starting with the lowest leaves first, usually points to underwatering. Leaves curling inward and feeling unusually thick, paired with dark green, vigorous growth, points to excess nitrogen. Newer leaves curling upward with distorted, puckered edges, especially alongside blossom end rot on the fruit, points to a calcium issue. Yellowing between the leaf veins on older leaves before curling develops suggests magnesium deficiency, and purpling on the stems and the undersides of leaves, alongside curling, often points to a phosphorus lockout, which circles back to that soil pH issue we just covered, since phosphorus becomes unavailable when pH drifts too low. Pests cause curling too. Aphids and thrips feed on the undersides of leaves and cause a cupping or curling response as the leaf reacts to the damage. Check the undersides of curling leaves closely with a hand lens or even just your phone camera zoomed in. If you see tiny insects, that's your answer, and a strong water spray followed by insecticidal soap usually resolves it. There's also a less common but genuinely confusing issue called edema, a cellular disorder that shows up as a whitish, slightly crystallized texture on the underside of leaves, sometimes severe enough to cause curling. It's caused by irregular water uptake, most common in indoor or greenhouse peppers, and improving airflow around the plant, sometimes with a small fan, tends to help. Sunscald versus blossom end rot, telling them apart. Both show up as a discolored, sunken patch on the fruit, and people frequently confuse the two. The distinction is simple once you know it. Sunscald only appears on the side of the fruit that was directly exposed to intense sun, and it looks pale, whitish, or tan, with a papery texture. Blossom end rot always appears specifically at the blossom end of the fruit, the bottom tip, opposite the stem, regardless of which side was facing the sun, and it looks more sunken and dark. If a damaged area moved with the sun's exposure, it's sunscald. If it's always at that same bottom tip no matter which way the fruit was facing, it's blossom end rot, and the watering consistency fix from the feeding section applies. Bacterial spot, bacterial wilt, and a simple test to tell wilts apart. Bacterial spot shows up as small, water-soaked, irregular spots on the leaves that turn brown and necrotic over time, often surrounded by a yellow halo, and it can also cause raised, scab-like spots directly on the fruit. It spreads through wet conditions and splashing water, so the same prevention applies as with tomatoes. Water at the base, improve airflow, and avoid handling wet plants. Bacterial wilt is a different, more dramatic problem. It causes sudden wilting of leaves on just a few branches, while those leaves stay green even as they droop, which is the key giveaway that separates it from a fungal wilt. Here's a genuinely useful diagnostic trick if you suspect this. Cut through the lower stem of a wilting plant and place the cut end in a clear glass of water. If you see a milky white stream of bacteria oozing out into the water within a few minutes, that confirms bacterial wilt. Unfortunately, there's no cure once a plant has it, and the affected plant should be removed. Phytophthora blight, the most serious pepper disease overall. This is a soil-borne disease that can kill a plant remarkably fast, sometimes within days, often starting in low, poorly draining areas of the garden after heavy rain. The first sign is frequently just a sudden, complete wilting or death of the plant, with dark, almost purplish lesions at the base of the stem near the soil line. Good drainage is the best prevention. Raised beds or well-amended soil that doesn't hold standing water after rain significantly reduce the risk. And if a plant dies suddenly without a clear cause, removing it and avoiding replanting peppers in that exact spot for a season or two is the safest move. Mosaic virus is worth knowing about even though there's nothing to be done once it appears. It causes a mottled, blotchy pattern of light and dark green on the leaves, sometimes with stunted or distorted growth. It spreads through aphids and through handling infected plants, and there's no treatment. The only response is removing the affected plant to prevent it spreading to neighbors. Choosing varieties labeled as resistant to tobacco mosaic virus when you buy seed is the most effective prevention available to a home gardener. Blossom drop, the single most common complaint in pepper growing. This is when flowers form and then simply fall off the plant before ever becoming a pepper. And it almost always comes down to one of a few specific stresses. Temperatures below 55 to 60 degrees at night, or above 90 degrees during the day, are the single biggest cause. The plant essentially decides it doesn't have enough stable energy to support developing fruit and aborts the flower instead. High humidity can interfere with pollen release and viability. Inconsistent soil moisture, swinging between too dry and too wet, adds additional stress on top of temperature. And low pollinator activity or poor airflow can prevent pollination from completing even when temperature and moisture are fine. The genuinely good news here is that blossom drop from heat or cold is temporary. Once temperatures stabilize back into a comfortable range, the same plant will usually resume flowering and setting fruit on its own, without any intervention needed beyond patience and consistent care in the meantime. If you're growing in a greenhouse or enclosed space with limited airflow, gently shaking the plant or its support every couple of days during flowering can help release pollen and improve fruit set. Why won't my peppers turn red? The question almost every pepper grower eventually asks. If your peppers have reached full size but are staying stubbornly green, there are really only a few possible explanations, and walking through them in order usually finds your answer. First, and most common, it simply hasn't been long enough yet. A pepper that's reached full size can still take another 2 to 3 weeks to change color. This is completely normal, especially for bell peppers and larger varieties, and patience alone solves it in most cases. Second, check your specific variety. Some peppers, including many jalapeños and certain bell varieties bred for the commercial market, are genetically programmed to stay green even at full biological ripeness. If that's what you're growing, The pepper isn't unripe, it's simply a green at maturity variety, and waiting longer won't change the color. Third, temperature plays a real role on both ends. Cold nighttime temperatures slow or stop the ripening process, since the enzymes responsible for breaking down green chlorophyll and producing color become less active in cold. But extreme heat causes the opposite problem. The plant shifts its limited energy towards survival rather than ripening fruit, so a heat-stressed plant can also stall out with green peppers that just won't progress. Fourth, light matters. The ripening process is partly light-triggered, so a plant that's shaded for much of the day may ripen its fruit considerably slower than one in full sun. And finally, if you genuinely can't wait any longer, you can speed up the final ripening of an already full-size pepper by picking it and placing it in a paper bag with a ripe banana or apple for a few days. The ethylene gas those fruits naturally release will help push the color change along. The same trick that works for green tomatoes. Pest issues specific to peppers. Aphids are the most common pest, clustering on new growth and the undersides of leaves. A strong water spray followed by insecticidal soap handles most infestations within a few applications. Pepper weevils are more serious, regionally specific pest in warmer growing areas. They lay eggs inside developing fruit, and an infested pepper will often show a small puncture mark and may drop from the plant prematurely. Removing and destroying any affected fruit, rather than composting it, helps prevent the population from spreading. You genuinely have a choice with peppers that you don't have with most vegetables. Harvest green for a crisper, more bitter, slightly less sweet flavor, or wait for full color change for a sweeter, more flavorful, more nutritious pepper. Neither is wrong. It depends entirely on what you're using them for and how patient you're feeling. For sweet peppers, full ripeness brings noticeably more sugar and flavor, which is why a ripe red bell pepper tastes meaningfully sweeter than a green one from the exact same plant. For hot peppers, full ripeness generally brings more developed, complex heat and flavor as well, not just color. If you're specifically growing hot peppers and want them as spicy as possible, there are a few techniques worth knowing, with an honest caveat up front. The research here is genuinely mixed, and what works in one climate doesn't always work the same way in another. So treat these as things worth experimenting with rather than guaranteed results. The most commonly cited method is mild water stress. Letting the soil dry out somewhat between waterings, specifically after the plant has already set fruit, is believed to trigger the plant's natural defense response and increase capsaicin production, since capsaicin exists specifically to deter animals from eating the fruit. Some growers report real results from this. Other controlled research, including trials run by university extension programs in different climates, has found the opposite effect, or no consistent effect at all. So this is genuinely not a guaranteed trick. More something worth trying cautiously on a plant or two rather than your entire harvest, since pushing the stress too far simply produces a smaller, weaker harvest with no heat benefit at all. Time on the plant matters more reliably than water stress does. In general, capsaicin continues to accumulate the longer a pepper stays on the vine, which is part of why a fully ripe red jalapeno tends to taste hotter than a green one picked early, beyond just the flavor changes from ripening itself. Patience, simply letting peppers ripen fully before picking, is one of the more consistently supported ways to maximize heat. One thing that's pure myth, worth clearing up directly. Planting a hot pepper next to a sweet pepper will not make the sweet pepper spicy and won't make your hot pepper milder either, at least not within the same growing season. Pepper plants can cross-pollinate if you're saving seeds for next year, which could affect heat levels in the next generation grown from those seeds, but it has no effect on the heat of fruit already growing on the parent plants this season. If a sweet pepper tastes unexpectedly hot, that's far more likely to be genuine variation within the variety, or a fruit that didn't develop quite as expected, rather than cross-contamination from a neighboring hot pepper plant. To harvest, use scissors or pruners to snip the stem rather than pulling, since pepper branches can snap easily under a hard pull, potentially damaging the rest of the plant and any other developing fruit nearby. For storage, peppers actually tolerate refrigeration better than tomatoes do. Store them in the crisper drawer, ideally in a perforated bag to maintain some humidity without trapping excess moisture that encourages rot. They'll typically keep for 1 to 2 weeks refrigerated. If you have a larger harvest than you can use fresh, peppers freeze exceptionally well. Simply slice, remove the seeds and membrane, and freeze in a single layer before transferring to a bag, which avoids one large frozen clump. Hot peppers also dry exceptionally well, either in a dehydrator or simply air-dried in a well-ventilated spot, and dried peppers can be stored for many months and ground into your own homemade chili powder whenever you need it. As frost approaches at the end of the season, pick all remaining peppers, even fully green ones. Unlike tomatoes, peppers won't continue ripening particularly well once picked unripe and exposed to cold. So green peppers harvested at season's end are best used as green peppers in cooking, rather than expecting them to attain color on a windowsill the way tomatoes do. If you're growing peppers in a region with mild winters, or in containers you can move indoors, here's something many gardeners don't realize. Pepper plants are technically tender perennials, not true annuals. In their native tropical range, a pepper plant can live and continue producing for several years. If you bring a healthy container-grown pepper plant indoors before the first frost, place it near a sunny window, and reduce watering significantly through the dormant winter months, it will often survive and can be moved back outside the following spring already established, sometimes producing fruit weeks earlier than a brand new seedling would. The plant will drop most of its leaves and look fairly rough through winter, which is normal, not a sign it's dying, and new growth typically resumes once you increase watering and light again in spring. One last practical note worth mentioning, since it ties back to the chaos and companion planting ideas you may have come across elsewhere. Peppers generally do well planted near basil, which some gardeners believe helps repel certain pests through its strong scent, and near onions and garlic for similar reasons. What's worth avoiding is planting peppers near other members of the nightshade family in the exact same spot year after year, including tomatoes, eggplant, and potatoes, since they are vulnerable to several of the same soil-borne diseases we just covered, including phytophthora blight. Rotating where you plant your peppers and other nightshades from year to year, even just moving them to a different bed or section of the garden, meaningfully reduces the buildup of these diseases in your soil over time. That's the complete pepper journey. Choosing the right variety, starting seeds with the warmth peppers specifically demand, getting them safely outside without cold stress, feeding correctly, solving the problems that come up, and understanding exactly why peppers ripen the way they do. Follow this from start to finish, and you'll end the season with a strong harvest instead of a healthy-looking plant that never quite produced. Next up, we're doing this same complete breakdown for cucumbers, and there's a pollination problem specific to cucumbers that causes a huge number of misshapen, bitter fruits, and almost nobody growing them for the first time knows to look for it. If this helped, subscribe. We're covering one crop at a time, start to finish, all season long.